obsession with sex long before he attained the position at Indiana University. So for him, all forms of sexual experience, to one degree or another, could have merit that were outside the pale of traditional morality.
Many researchers have come to believe that it was this philosophy that allowed Kinsey and his team to communicate with active child molesters and even train them to record their abuse in a scientific manner. While the Kinsey Institute continues to deny this, further evidence is found from the testimony of Dr. Clarence Tripp on the Phil Donahue Show. Listen carefully as Tripp confirms that there were multiple pedophiles, not just one, and says that they were trained observers that used stopwatches.
I'm going to say that once more, and if I'm wrong, let them sue me. He said oral and manual techniques were used on those children. What American is going to defend that?
How does C.A. Tripp respond to that?
She's talking about data that came from pedophiles, that he would listen to only pedophiles who were very careful, used stopwatches, knew how to record their things, did careful surveys. And these she resents very much, but they're very important.
So he interviewed people who were known criminals. I assume, were they in prison at the time?
Oh, certainly not. But they were, in her sense, criminals because they were pedophiles. But they were trained
Oh, in her
trained
sense,
observers.
they were criminals because they were pedophiles. They're raping children and they're not criminals. You're going to defend
Nobody
that.
was raping children. What they were doing...
What do you call sexually, manually, and orally abusing a baby, and you're a bloody pedophile?
We also have an interview that was a phone interview that I have a copy of. It's in my book, between Gebhard and Dr. Muir, who was my editor, in which Gebhard admits that they told the pedophiles to use stopwatches.
The interview Dr. Reisman refers to took place on November 2nd, 1992, between Dr. Gordon Muir and Paul Gebhard. Dr. Muir also appeared on The Donahue Show as the editor of the book, Kinsey, Sex and Fraud. On the show, he confronted Clarence Tripp.
And you're telling me that Kinsey came across in an interview sample of 5,300 people, he found pedophiles who had stopwatches, just happened to have stopwatches, just happened to have all that data handy?
Some 2 years later, in a phone interview, Dr. Muir would pursue a similar line of questioning with Paul Gebhard, one of the original co-authors of the Kinsey reports, who succeeded Alfred Kinsey as the original director of the Kinsey Institute. Listen carefully how Gebhard admits that there were multiple pedophiles that he and Kinsey worked with, how they actually encouraged some of the adults to molest children, and that it was at the instruction of Kinsey and his team that they used stopwatches.
Table 32. Yeah, the table's all right, but these all were done with stopwatches necessarily. It says below table 32, the legend says duration of stimulation before climax. Observations timed with second hand or stopwatch. So second hand or stopwatch. Okay, well that's, you refreshed my memory. I had no idea that it was used on that many. Well, my question to you is this. Who did that? Who did the timing? It was dependent on who it was. Most of it was done by one individual, a man with some scientific training, but not a known scientist. The other cases were done by parents at our suggestion. And let's see, then there were some that were done by a nursery school personnel. Was that at your suggestion too? Yes. When these people would report to us, they saw childhood sexual activity. We asked them to watch it and take notes, and if possible, time it and report back to us. Some of the stimulation was clearly being done by adults themselves, isn't that correct? Yes, that was pedophiles. Or it was particularly one man, but there were several pedophiles that gave us data. But since they were all doing the same thing and reporting on the same thing and taking the same measurements, it looks like it was organized ahead of time. Is that right? No. No, we just simply asked anyone who had any data on childhood sexuality to tell us about it. Well, what about the cases then, which it says in the book, some of them were followed up for several years to make sure that true orgasm was involved. That looks like prospective planning there. Yeah, but not on our part. You mean pedophiles just took it upon themselves to do follow-up experiments to find out true orgasms were involved? No. We had some. Try this again.
At this stage of the interview, Gebhardt engages in a bit of wordplay, but listen carefully as Dr. Muir gets to the point with him.
Once we ask people about giving us their observations, we would ask them later, too. In other words, if there were some pedophiles who reported their data to us, and if they got into contact with us later, we would then ask more about it. We follow up on, like, re-interviewing people occasionally. We call them retakes. I think that's mentioned. Right, it is. But I mean, what I'm trying to get at was, this sounds like it was a little bit of prospective planning here. No. We did not plan and organize any Masters and Johnson-type experiments with children. Period. Never did. So, do pedophiles normally go around with stopwatches? They do if we tell them that we're interested in it. That this isn't a plan on our part. They do if we tell them that we're interested in it.
I want to know who these children are, how their parents were involved, and have we talked to those children now as adults?
When I wrote to the Kinsey Institute and I asked, what about these children? They just casually wrote me back. Gebhardt casually wrote me back that, well, we never had any follow-up on these children. It was too expensive, he said, or just impossible. What does he mean there's never been a follow-up? You just talked about men who are raping children, at least 317 children. Now we're looking at, it comes up to maybe 2,035 at minimum, probably. The youngest 2 months of age, and you call yourselves, quote-unquote, scientists, and you've never even followed up. That's a lie. There's got to be some information, and if it was good information, if they had found out that these children were completely unharmed, lived fine lives, we would know about it. They would have passed that information on to us so fast.
Many of the children abused by Kinsey's pedophiles probably had no idea that they were part of a government-sponsored study. Most likely living out their lives in suffering and confusion about what had happened to them. But when the Family Research Council released its documentary, The Children of Table 34, the haunting image of a stopwatch sparked the memory of a woman who calls herself Esther White.
My grandfather molested me when I was around 4. And he never did again. But he went to Indiana University to get his teaching certificate. And he took biology while he was there. And so I'm assuming that he probably met Kinsey there because the whole university was involved in his research.
As a child, Esther says she was taken by her father and grandfather to meet with Alfred Kinsey and to be interviewed by him. But the real purpose of that meeting would be a mystery for years to come.
I didn't really No, I didn't connect it all until I read Judith Reisman's writings, especially when it came to the video that she did where they showed a stopwatch. And that was the key. I realized, yes, that was what was going on.
Now in her 70s, her desire is to remain as anonymous as possible, out of consideration for her family. Esther White is her assumed name.
How old were you when you met Dr. Alfred Kinsey?
It was probably in 1943 or so, 43 or 44. I was born in 34. My father was very excited about taking me there to meet Dr. Kinsey. I didn't know who he was. All I knew was that my dad was very excited about taking me there for an interview. And he was instructing me that I was to be very nice to this man and answer him. He told me they would ask me about my family and whether I loved my family and so forth. So when we got there, it was at my grandfather's and great-grandmother's house. And Mr. Kinsey and his two colleagues were late in getting there because it was wintertime. And he was doing a seminar at Ohio State University. This was in Columbus, Ohio. And when he came, he was in very much of a rush because they were so late. And he kneeled down in front of me and asked me questions about whether I loved my daddy, whether I loved my family. And of course I said yes, because I did. I loved my family. And the interview was very short. There was a man with him that had a clipboard who was taking down my answers to the questions. I can't remember all the questions he asked, but it was probably a 5 or 10 minute interview. And just before they left, my grandfather said, "What about the check?" And he says, "Oh yes, I almost forgot."
Who said that, Kinsey?
Kinsey said that. And so my grandfather took a check from him, and Kinsey said, "I made it out to both of you because I didn't know which one was going to get the money."
The disturbing implication is that Alfred Kinsey used taxpayer money via the Rockefeller Foundation to finance pedophiles who were actively molesting children.
Why would he pay them? For what?
At the time, I didn't know for what. Many years later, I had found out that my dad had actually helped Alfred Kinsey do research for his book.
Esther's own father had been molesting her for years and sending information to the Kinsey Institute. When Kinsey's book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, was released, her father showed her a copy and boasted that he had helped to write it. At the time, she did not know what he meant.
He gave me a copy of the book in 1947, but it was a pre-edition signed by somebody, autographed by somebody, and I don't remember who. But my father gave me the book and said that he helped Alfred Kinsey research on the book, and that it was going to change the way the world looked at sexuality.
How old were you when your father first began to molest you?
I was probably around 6, maybe 7. I couldn't tell you exactly.
Do you ever remember your father molesting you with a stopwatch?
Yes.
And then would he record information?
There were papers on the dresser, and I saw one of the papers one day, and it had a lot of questions on it. And there were little boxes to check those things off when those things were done. And it was talking about orgasm. I didn't know what that word meant, but at the time,